The office building always looked busy from the outside. Cars moved in and out of the parking lot. People walked fast with laptops in their bags, and the glass doors opened and closed all day. Inside, the company felt even louder. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked, and small groups stood near the coffee machine, talking and laughing louder than necessary. It was the kind of place where everyone wanted to be noticed, except for one person. Her name was Nora. Nora worked at a simple desk near the back of the open office, close to the window, but far from the noisy center. She was always there before most people arrived. Her computer already on, a small notebook open beside her. She wore plain clothes, nothing flashy, nothing branded. Her dark hair was always tied back neatly, and there was a calmness about her that almost didn't fit with the restless energy of the office. Most people knew she worked in administration, but if you asked them exactly what she did, they wouldn't be able to say. They saw her carrying files, answering emails, printing documents, helping with schedules, and setting up small things for meetings, but no one really paid attention. To them, she was just the quiet one at the back. When new employees joined the company, no one bothered to introduce them to Nora properly. The team lead would walk them around, proudly pointing out the marketing team, the sales team, the finance room, the CEO's office, the meeting spaces with glass walls. If they passed by Nora's desk, it was always quick. And that's admin. They handle paperwork and support. Someone would say lightly, already moving on before the new person could even catch her name. Nora didn't seem to mind. She smiled if anyone looked her way, nodded politely when spoken to, and returned to her work without asking for more. She ate lunch at her desk most days, usually something simple she brought from home. Sometimes she listened to soft music in one earbud while she worked, so quietly that no one even noticed. People made assumptions about her. That was the thing about that office. If you didn't speak loudly, if you didn't brag about your ideas, if you didn't stay late just to be seen staying late, people thought you were unimportant. They thought you were weak. They thought you were easy to ignore. One of the louder voices in the office belonged to Daniel, a mid-level manager who had joined the company a little over a year ago. He liked to walk around as if he owned the place, greeting people with a cheerful tone that never quite reached his eyes. He loved talking about targets, performance, and the company culture. To him, success meant looking important. He never looked at Nora for more than a second. If he needed something printed, he would send her a short email without even adding please. If he passed by her during the day, he might drop a stack of documents on her desk, already half turned away as he said, "Can you handle this?" before she could answer. Once, when someone asked who finalized all the staff contracts, he shrugged and said, "Admin, I guess. I don't know her name." There were others like him. A small group usually gathered near the coffee machine in the late mornings and afternoons. They liked to complain about projects, laugh at office rumors, and talk about who might get promoted next. When work was slow, their voices grew even louder and their eyes wandered. One day, as Nora passed by the coffee area holding a pile of files, she caught a fragment of their conversation. "She's always so quiet," one of the women, Layla, said, tilting her head in Nora's direction. "I've never heard her say more than 3 words at a time. Do you think she actually likes working here?" "Maybe she's scared to talk," another co-worker, Imran, joked. "Some people don't belong in fast-paced companies. They just want to hide behind their screens and do boring tasks." Daniel smirked. "Relax. People like her keep the lights on. I guess they do the small stuff. But don't expect them to have big ideas." They laughed. Not loudly enough for the whole office to hear, but loud enough for Nora to feel it. She didn't stop walking, didn't turn her head, didn't let her shoulders drop. She simply continued to her desk, placed the files down, and took a small breath before returning to her work. She was used to being overlooked. It had happened before in other places, in other rooms, with other people who thought they could see a whole person with one glance. It didn't surprise her anymore, but every now and then it still stung. In meetings, it was the same story. Nora often sat along the wall, closer to the door, with a pen in her hand and a notepad open on her lap. She was there to keep track of schedules, requests, and small tasks that needed to be followed up after. She listened carefully, not just to the words, but to the tone of each person, who respected whom. who pretended, who took credit for ideas that were not theirs. Once, during a planning meeting for an upcoming project, she gently raised her hand. The team was struggling with a scheduling problem. They needed a way to manage client visits without overloading staff, and the discussion had gone in circles for 10 minutes. "I might have a suggestion," Nora said quietly. A few people turned their heads toward her. The project lead, a younger manager eager to impress, raised his eyebrows. "Yes?" he asked, as if surprised she had something to say. She explained calmly that they could rotate staff in pairs, assigning them fixed days for client meetings and fixed days for internal work. She had seen similar systems succeed before, and she listed the benefits in short, clear sentences. It was simple, practical, and it solved the problem without needing extra hires. There was a pause. Then Daniel chuckled softly. "That sounds a bit basic, doesn't it?" he said. "We're not running a school schedule. We need something more dynamic, more strategic." The project lead nodded quickly, afraid to side against Daniel. "Yeah, we probably need a more advanced model. But thanks," he said, already moving on. "Anyone else?" Nora closed her notebook slowly. She didn't argue, didn't defend her idea, didn't remind them that basic solutions often work best. She simply wrote a short note to herself and kept listening. 2 weeks later, after several late nights and a lot of confusion, the team ended up using almost the exact same system she had suggested, only with more complicated charts and fancier words. No one remembered she had mentioned it first. No one thanked her. They praised the project lead for finding a smart way to handle the schedule. Life in the office went on like that. Days blurred into each other. Emails, reports, meetings, small jokes at her expense that people thought she didn't hear. Sometimes someone would ask, "So, Nora, what did you do this weekend?" and then look away before she answered, already busy with their phone. Sometimes they discussed expensive restaurants, foreign vacations, luxury cars. No one ever asked her what kind of life she had outside the building. What they didn't know was that when Nora left the office at 5 o'clock, she stepped into a very different world. Her simple clothes and quiet presence did not give anything away to them. She was just another ordinary employee lost in the background. No one wondered why the CEO always greeted her politely when he saw her in the hallway. No one noticed how the older receptionist smiled at her with real warmth, as if they shared a secret. No one asked why Nora's eyes sometimes carried the calm of someone who had seen storms before and survived them. They only saw what they wanted to see, a quiet woman at a small desk, easy to ignore. For now, the days started to feel heavier for Nora, even though nothing looked different from the outside. The same buzzing lights hummed above her desk. The same coffee smell drifted across from the break area every morning. The same small group stood talking in low circles, laughing at things that were never really that funny. What changed was how often she felt eyes on her. It began after a small mistake. One Monday morning, Nora received 2 urgent emails at the same time. One was from the finance team, asking her to prepare files for a meeting. The other was from Daniel, asking her to print and arrange some documents for his department review. She handled the finance request first because it had an earlier deadline, then moved quickly to finish Daniel's task. She worked with focus, but one of the files took longer to print than usual. When she finally brought the documents to the meeting room where Daniel was waiting, she was 3 minutes late. Just 3 minutes. To Nora, it felt like nothing. To Daniel, in front of an audience, it was an opportunity. "There you are," he said loudly as she stepped into the room. Several people looked up from their laptops. "Next time, try to understand what urgent means. We can't run a serious department if basic support doesn't respect time." The room went quiet. Nora felt the pause in the air. Her hands tightened on the file folder. She opened her mouth for a second, almost ready to explain, but she closed it again. She gave a small nod instead. "Sorry about the delay," she said softly. He sighed in an exaggerated way and waved his hand. "Just leave it. We'll manage." As she turned to leave, she heard a whisper from one of the chairs near the door. "She's always so slow," someone muttered. Nora walked out calmly, but inside, a small part of her felt bruised. She knew it was only a few minutes. She knew she had been working hard all morning, but mistakes, even small ones, seemed to stick to people like her more than anyone else. After that day, things shifted in a subtle way. People began to look at her differently whenever something went wrong. If a meeting room wasn't ready on time, someone would say, "Did Nora forget?" If the printer jammed, someone joked, "Maybe Nora broke it." If an email went to the wrong list, someone laughed, "Admin probably messed it up again." They were small comments, said with a half smile, as if they were harmless. But they added up. They created a picture of her in people's minds. The quiet woman who was always a step behind, always making little errors. The truth was, Nora fixed more problems than she caused. She stayed calm when others panicked about missing documents. She found old records people swore were lost. She noticed mistakes in schedules and corrected them before anyone got embarrassed in front of a client. But people did not talk about those moments loudly. They only talked loudly about the times they could blame her. One afternoon, the company held a team-building session in the main hall. A trainer had been invited to speak about communication and respect in the workplace. Posters with inspirational words were stuck on the walls. The CEO was out of the country, so several managers took the lead. Nora sat in the second row, holding a pen and a small notebook. She listened carefully as the trainer talked about empathy, teamwork, and company values. People nodded solemnly, writing nothing down but pretending to care. At one point, the trainer asked for volunteers to share experiences of feeling unseen or unheard at work. No one raised a hand. Nora felt something in her chest move. For a brief moment, she imagined standing up, walking to the front, and telling them everything, from the side comments to the way people spoke around her, as if she was a piece of furniture. But as soon as the thought appeared, she saw Daniel out of the corner of her eye, scrolling on his phone, half listening. She saw Layla whispering something to the person next to her. Nora stayed seated. The trainer, trying to keep the energy up, moved on to an exercise. Everyone had to pair up with someone they didn't usually talk to and ask them 3 questions about their life. "This will help build connection," the trainer said. People stood up and started moving around. Nora waited. No one walked toward her. She looked around and saw most people pair off quickly, friends with friends, managers with other managers. She held her pen a little tighter. Eventually, the trainer noticed her sitting alone and smiled kindly. "Someone partner with her, please," he said to the room. There was a brief, awkward moment. Imran, holding a cup of coffee, sighed quietly and walked over. "Come on, I'll join you," he said, sounding more tired than eager. They sat facing each other. "So," he said, glancing at the paper with the 3 questions, "what do you like to do outside of work?" Nora thought for a second. "I like reading," she said, "and cooking. I also help with a small charity group sometimes." "Nice," he replied, already looking around the room. "Next question, what's something people don't know about you?" That question hung there for a moment longer. Nora hesitated. There were many things people didn't know about her past, about the long nights when the company was nothing more than a risky idea, about the sacrifices she had made. But those were not stories to share in a forced exercise with someone who was not really interested. She gave a small smile. "People don't really know much about me at all," she said, keeping it light. "So I suppose almost everything." He gave a short laugh. "Yeah, you are quiet," he said. "We always wonder what's going on in your head." She could have asked him the same questions with genuine interest. Instead, she kept it simple. The exercise ended quickly. The trainer moved on. The session finished with polite applause. Afterward, as people picked up their things and prepared to go back to work, Daniel walked past Nora and Imran. "How was bonding time?" he said jokingly. "Did admin share all her deep secrets?" A couple people laughed. Imran smirked. "She likes reading and cooking," he said. Mystery solved. They kept walking, leaving Nora behind with her notebook in her hands. She turned it over slowly, thinking about how odd it was that people thought they knew her simply because they had seen her at a desk for months. Later that week, another situation pushed things further. The company was preparing for a visit from an important client, a long-term partner whose opinion could affect future deals. The office needed to look perfect. The meeting rooms had to be spotless. The schedules had to be precise. Nora received a long email from one of the senior managers, listing details she needed to handle. Printed information packs, labeled folders, refreshments, name tags, and a digital presentation setup. It was a lot of work for one person, but she started early and moved through the list methodically. On the morning of the visit, she arrived earlier than usual. The air in the building felt tense. Managers walked faster, spoke in shorter sentences, and checked their watches every few minutes. By 10 o'clock, everything Nora could control was ready. The folders were aligned neatly. The screens were tested, and the refreshments table was arranged simply but nicely. She stepped back and checked everything twice. Just before the client arrived, Daniel came into the main meeting room to inspect things. He walked around slowly, picking up a folder here, looking at a name tag there. Nora stood quietly near the door, waiting in case he needed anything. "Who chose these cups?" he asked suddenly, pointing at the coffee table. The cups were plain white, the same ones the office used every day. "They're from a usual set in the kitchen," Nora replied. "They're clean and matching." He frowned. "For important guests, we should have something better. This looks cheap." Nora paused for a moment. "I wasn't told to order special ones," she said gently. "If you like, I can ask the pantry staff to bring the glass set from the storage." "No time now," he cut in, raising his voice slightly. "This is what I mean. You have to think ahead. We can't spoon-feed every little detail." Two other employees, standing nearby, watched the exchange. One of them shook his head slowly, as if saying, "Here we go again." Nora felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her posture straight. "Understood," she said softly. He sighed dramatically. "Just go back to your desk. We'll handle it." She walked out of the room, each step steady even though her chest felt tight. She knew she had followed the instructions given to her. She knew, deep down, that the clients would not care about the cups. But it wasn't really about cups. It was about how easy it was to blame the quiet person in the room. What Nora didn't see was the way one of the older staff members, a man who had been with the company from the early days, watched the scene with a troubled expression. He knew more than most people. He knew who she really was to the company's story. He also knew something else. The founder was coming back soon. And when he arrived, a lot of things people took for granted were going to change. The first sign that something was different came on a quiet Thursday morning. Nora arrived at the office, as she always did, a little earlier than everyone else. The sky outside was still pale, and the building felt calm before the usual rush. She made herself a small cup of tea in the kitchen, then sat down at her desk and opened her computer. She had a habit of checking the calendar first thing every day. It helped her see what was coming. Meetings, deadlines, events, small reminders she had set for herself. That morning, as she scrolled to the company calendar, her eyes paused on one short line. Founder's visit, 11:30 a.m. Her hand stopped on the mouse. For a moment, she simply stared at the words, as if they might change. She knew he had been traveling, visiting partners and investors, attending conferences in other countries. His visits to the main office were not rare, but they were never casual. Things shifted when he was around. People sat up straighter, changed their tone, and spoke more carefully. Nora took a slow breath. She already knew he was back in the country. What she hadn't expected was that he would visit the office that day. As the hours passed, people began to hear the news. A short email was sent to all staff. The founder will be on site at 11:30 a.m. for a brief walkthrough and client meeting. Please ensure your areas are tidy and all appointments are on schedule. The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Chairs were pushed in. Desks were wiped. The same people who complained all week suddenly started talking about professionalism and standards. The volume of gossip dropped. Laughter softened. The office tried to smooth out its rough edges. Daniel walked around with a serious face, giving small instructions. Clear those boxes from the hallway. Make sure the presentation slides are perfect. Don't leave empty coffee cups on desks today. He walked past Nora and paused. You're handling the visitor badges in the meeting room again, right? He asked. Yes, she replied calmly. Everything is already prepared. I double-checked the schedule, folders, and screen setup. Good, he said, glancing at her desk. Try not to be late with anything today. We can't afford mistakes when he's here. There was again the small jab, dressed as a reminder. Nora simply nodded. Understood. He moved on, already talking to someone else about the guest parking arrangements. Nora turned back to her screen, but her thoughts were somewhere else now, somewhere outside the office walls, in a quiet apartment where she had shared many late-night talks about this very company. As the morning went on, people kept checking the time. Every time the elevator dinged, heads lifted to see who it was. It was never him. The tension built slowly, like a string being pulled tighter and tighter. At 11:20, the older staff member who had been watching things carefully lately, his name was Tarek, stopped by Nora's desk. He carried a folder in one hand and a gentle smile on his face. "Big day," he said quietly. She looked up at him and gave a small smile. "Seems like it," she replied. "Everything ready?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes," she said. "Meeting room is set. Reception has a list. The client materials are in place." He nodded slowly, then lowered his voice. "You're handling this well," he said. "Better than most." Nora looked at him for a second, surprised by the kindness in his tone. "Thank you," she said softly. He held her gaze a little longer, like he wanted to say more, but then someone called his name from across the room. He gave her a small nod and walked away. At 11:30 sharp, the elevator dinged again. This time, no one pretended not to care. Heads turned. Chairs shifted. People watched as the elevator doors opened. The founder stepped out, dressed simply in a dark suit with no tie. He wasn't the tallest person in the building, but he carried an easy confidence that made space around him. His face was familiar from photos on the wall and from company videos played during events. Some of the staff had seen him in person before. Others only knew him as a respected name. Two senior managers rushed forward to greet him, shaking his hand, smiling wide. A couple people clapped quietly, unsure if it was the right moment. The receptionist greeted him warmly, and he thanked her by name. He spoke politely to the managers, asked how things were going, listened for a minute, then let his eyes move across the office floor. He didn't rush. He looked at the rows of desks, the teams typing away, the printed posters about values and goals. Then his gaze stopped. From her desk near the back, Nora watched him. For a moment, it felt like time slowed, like every sound in the office dimmed. Their eyes met, and in that second, the whole building seemed to shrink around them. The managers were still talking when he started walking, not toward the meeting room, not toward the executive offices, toward her. Several people noticed and exchanged quick looks. They expected him to stop halfway, to greet some senior employee or shake hands with a department head. But he didn't stop. He went straight to Nora's desk. She stood up as he reached her, up close. The tension in her chest eased slightly. His presence was deeply familiar, in a way no one else in that building could understand. He smiled at her, not the polite, formal smile he used in public, but a softer one. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "Always," she replied, her voice low but steady. There was a brief silence, full of unspoken things only they knew. Then, in a tone loud enough for the nearest people to hear, he added, "Thank you for keeping things running while I've been away." Several heads turned sharply now. Daniel, who had been standing near the main walkway, froze mid-step. Layla stopped typing. Imran looked up over his monitor. The founder shifted slightly and glanced around, noticing the way people were watching. Instead of moving on, he did something no one expected. He placed a gentle hand on the edge of Nora's desk and spoke clearly. "For those who don't know," he said, his voice steady but warm, "this is my wife." The words dropped into the air like a stone into still water. Silence spread across the floor. The sound of typing stopped. Someone in the back dropped a pen, and it rolled across the tiles, loud in the quiet. Nora stood still, her hands resting lightly on the desk, her eyes on his face. She didn't look proud or smug. She didn't look like someone who had been waiting for this moment to prove a point. She just looked calm. "Scene." The founder continued, his tone natural, as if he was simply filling in a missing detail. "She has been part of this company's story since before we had this office, before we had half the clients we do now," he said. Many of the systems you depend on every day started as notes in her notebooks. Tarek, standing near the printer, let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Daniel's face slowly changed color. He tried to pull his expression into something neutral, but the shock was clear in his eyes. Layla looked from Nora to the founder and back again, her mouth slightly open. People who had ignored Nora for months suddenly remembered every joke, every small slight. Every time they had spoken carelessly in front of her. The founder looked around the room, taking in the faces, the surprise, the guilt, the confusion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply seemed to be measuring something invisible in the room. Then he turned back to Nora and said, in a tone much softer now, "We'll talk later?" She nodded once. "Of course." He gave her a small smile, and then finally allowed the managers to lead him toward the main meeting room. But the energy in the office had completely changed. Conversations did not pick up again right away. People pretended to work, but their minds were elsewhere. Nora sat down slowly, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She had not asked for this moment. She had lived a long time between two roles: the simple worker in the office and the partner who knew the company's heart from the inside. Now those two worlds had suddenly collided in front of everyone. She took a quiet breath and put her hands back on the keyboard. The work on her screen was the same. The building was the same. But how they saw her was no longer the same. And for many people in that office, this was just the beginning of a very uncomfortable awakening. The rest of the morning passed, but for most people in the office, it didn't feel real. They moved their mouse, clicked their keyboards, opened files, but their minds stayed stuck on one moment. The founder standing at Nora's desk, calling her his wife in front of everyone. Some tried to act normal. Others kept glancing toward her every few minutes, as if seeing her for the first time. A few avoided looking at her at all. Nora felt the shift around her like a quiet wind. People who used to walk past her without a word suddenly offered tight smiles. One person from marketing, who had never said more than good morning before, came by under the excuse of asking for a file. "Hey, Nora, did you need any help with anything today?" he asked, his voice a little too bright. She gave him a gentle smile. "No, thank you. Everything is under control." He nodded quickly, almost relieved, and walked away. In another corner, two employees pretended to chat about a project, but their whispers were about something else. "Did you know?" one asked. "Of course not," the other replied. "I thought she was just, Just what?" came the quiet answer. They both fell silent, suddenly uncomfortable with their own words. Only Tarek seemed calm. He worked as usual, answering questions, fixing small problems, helping people find documents. Every now and then, he looked over at Nora and saw how she kept her posture steady, her hands moving with the same care as before. There was no pride in her face, no revenge in her eyes. If anything, she looked a little tired. Around noon, the founder finished his first meeting with the visiting clients. The door to the main room opened, and people watched as he walked out with the senior managers, talking and shaking hands. The clients left, smiling. From the doorway, the founder thanked them and then turned back into the office. Instead of going straight to the elevator, he paused and spoke to the managers. "Can we gather everyone for a few minutes?" he asked. "I'd like to say something before I leave." The managers agreed at once. One of them hurried off to send a quick message across the internal chat. "All staff, please come to main hall in 10 minutes for a brief address from the founder." You didn't say no to that. People got up from their desks and moved toward the hall, some with genuine interest, others with nervous curiosity. Nora stayed where she was for a moment, staring at the message on her screen. Then she closed her laptop and stood up. As she walked toward the hall, she heard a chair scrape behind her. "Hey, Nora," a voice said. She turned and saw Daniel standing there. For once, he didn't look fully in control of himself. His usual confident posture had a crack in it. His eyes didn't sit still. "Yes?" she asked softly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The word seemed to get stuck somewhere between his thoughts and his tongue. We should go," he finally said, nodding toward the hall. "They're waiting." She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Let's go," she replied. They walked in the same direction, but with a space between them. In the main hall, employees filled the room, some leaning against the walls, others standing in loose lines. The founder waited at the front, talking quietly with one of the managers. When he saw that most people had arrived, he stepped forward.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.